Hi, everybody. Welcome to February's listening session. It's great to have received so many questions and comments in advance, and I really look forward to the conversation today. I thought that what I do today to open things is because we got so many questions about interfaith and our housing strategies and economic recovery. I thought I'd start the day with an opportunity for me to talk with you about what we're doing on a whole bunch of different fronts with an eye to recovery, and then take some of the questions that we received in advance, as well as any of those that come in today while we still have time. So first off, I really appreciate how interested everyone is in engaging in this way. I say every month now that I wish I could see your faces and really look forward to being able to do that. It was a year ago that I had my last in-person listening session. And I still remember that night so clearly because it was so fun to be at the library with a lot of people that had showed up to talk about property taxes, our budgets, to hear how my first month in office had been and more. And I so look forward to being able to do that again in the coming months as more and more of us are vaccinated. And if our numbers stay low or controlled, as we are working actively with the health district to make sure we're able to do. So I want to say first that I mentioned to the press last week, and I might have said, no, I don't think I said on my last listening session, that a couple weeks ago I visited St. Al's and their mass vaccination site at the hospital at that point. You've probably seen in the news that they're moving out to a larger facility now to consolidate all of their vaccinations. But to see so many of our residents that were ages 65 and up in line to get their vaccines just felt really good. And it was probably the happiest I've seen people having to wait in line in a long time because people were happy to be there. And I bring that up because so many of you are trying to get vaccines, and we encourage all of you that are willing to do that because it helps us get to a point where we can fully recover. And on recovery, I really believe that because our community rallied together, supported each other, made sacrifices, continues to mask and distance, wash hands, follow protocols, we will recover more strongly. It takes time and patience and focus, but we have that. And one thing that we've learned about economic opportunity and a strong economy in this community is how key housing is to that. And so, based on studies that we read in advance of the pandemic, our economic recovery task force, other experts, and frankly, so many stories from so many of you about how hard it is to find housing at our Boise budgets, we focused on affordable housing because it's key to recovery and key to a strong economy, because all of you that work here should be able to live here. So, on housing, I want to talk just quickly about some of the advances we've made in the last couple of weeks. About 2 weeks ago, our urban renewal district approved negotiating with a builder of homes that proposed an affordable housing development right here downtown at 17th and Idaho. And that developer proposes to use the housing bonus ordinance that our city council passed that enables the city to negotiate for additional housing at affordable Boise budgets in exchange for things that the builders of those homes need in particular areas around the town. You've also saw that City Council rezoned a property at Franklin and Orchard that is part of our housing land trust, where we have looked to see what land we can acquire and then put out for proposals for housing at Boise budgets, various budgets, to make it more easily and more readily available housing. And that'll be 200 some units when built. So we're making progress, but somebody asked in advance, how do we know the crisis is over? That's a hard thing to answer because right now our rental vacancies are incredibly low. People are struggling to find places that they can afford. Growth continues in this community, and so we're all looking for houses at Boise budgets. And what we are looking at from a city perspective is how home by home, unit by unit, we can increase the availability of housing for Boiseans at the budgets that we have with local wages at all different price points. So housing is a big piece of our economic recovery strategy and long-term economic success. Looking at innovation and transition to clean energy, new technologies that could be experimented with here, built here ideally, will help us grow from an economic perspective as well. And then of course, transportation. While during the pandemic, we knew that fewer people would want to be on buses, we focused on building out plans for mobility beyond cars. And we looked at, with people around this valley, our canals in this region, because we believe that by connecting people from farmland to foothills and everything in between, just like 50 years ago with the planning of the Greenbelt, where we had to map out what land existed, who owned it, what we might have to do to create something as incredible as the Greenbelt we now have. We started doing that with canals. And we hope that there will be willing partners in this region that will allow us to purchase or acquire easements so that people can have open space throughout their neighborhoods throughout Boise, but also get to work in different ways or get to school in different ways. And at the same time, with the new administration, we are so excited to leverage the funds that we invest in bus transportation in this region with federal dollars. And I want to see us be able to make progress on the State Street Corridor, as does the City Council, as do so many other leaders in this region. Because we know that by creating better transportation, we reduce traffic and congestion, especially when we're all working back at the office instead of at home. But we create opportunities for people to connect with new or different jobs than they might have been able to connect with before. So we're focused on that. And just, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to join just 5 other mayors. It was such a surprise when I got on the Zoom to see there were just 5 other mayors of mid-sized cities like ours to talk with Secretary Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, about our experience with CARES funding in the last stimulus and what we believe from what we learned would be helpful for cities, and most importantly, cities' residents in the next stimulus package. And in that conversation, we discussed the importance of childcare, just like our Economic Recovery Task Force and my transition committee on building an economy, a strong economy in Boise said, we need to have ready access to affordable childcare. Secretary heard that. We talked about our hope that there would be direct payments or direct stimulus to cities that are small, like Boise, under 500,000 people, so that instead of going through a reimbursement process at the state, we could directly support our residents with additional programs, like building out our small business grant program that we were able to do with a tiny bit of funds. Last time around, we hope to do more. And you saw that we just recently received from the federal government a rental assistance package of over $11 million that, in partnering with the Boise City Ada County Housing Authority, will be able to provide support to residents who are experiencing financial struggles, financial difficulties in meeting their rent. We talked about all of those and more as a key to resilience in the long run and recovery from COVID when we get there. So I really look forward to the questions that you've submitted or you have today, to continuing partnering with so many of you to keep our residents healthy and safe, our economy poised to recover, and our community resilient in the long run. Thanks so much for joining us today. Seth, do you want to take it from here?
Thank you so much, Mayor. I'd love to. And as you guys have probably seen, we have an American Sign Language interpreter here today. It's Lavona Andrew. She's here often, so if you've been here before, you'll probably recognize her. Thank you for being here, Lavona. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. For questions that are similar in topic, I'll try to combine them into one question so that we can get to as much as possible. They probably won't be verbatim because of that. However, if yours is one that we don't have time to get to, put it in the comments section on the YouTube. We'll get back to you. I've already reached out to a few of you already about questions that you put in because I'm trying to get you a little bit more info. Please include your name, your area of town you live in, and your question so that the mayor can address your particular circumstance. I'll be turning off my camera as the mayor's answering questions, so the American Sign Language interpreter can be side by side with the mayor for those who need it. Thank you everyone for joining. And we're going to start with the questions that we got from the online forum beforehand, and then we'll get to the questions on YouTube after. And the major question that we got from multiple people, these were the first folks that entered questions. It was Todor from Northwest Boise, Shirley from the Southeast, Dennis from the Northwest, Chris from the Northeast, and Nancy from the Northeast, and Julie all submitted questions that were basically somewhere that they were unhappy with the Interfaith Sanctuary's answers in the talk that they gave, the community meeting that they gave last week, and they wanted to know why the Interfaith Sanctuary is moving to State Street.
All right. Thanks for that question. That's a lot of people. So I can't remember all of the names that I just heard. I apologize for that, but thanks for sending in a question. You know, there's a couple things I want to talk about here. And I understand the concerns that people have, particularly in the neighborhoods surrounding the area that Interfaith Sanctuary is looking at potentially buying a piece of property for their shelter services. And while I can't speak to Interfaith's questions, answers, periods, et cetera, that folks weren't necessarily pleased with, I will say this. It's understandable that neighborhoods are concerned. It's important that residents and neighborhoods remain engaged in the process. And the city has a process that, while it seems wonky at times, and it is designed to ensure that the public hears and the city decision makers hear the fully thought out plans that are being proposed and seeking permission from an organization. And then at the same time that we as elected officials hear from experts on housing and homelessness, our police and other emergency service providers, and of course the public. And so while Interfaith Sanctuary is looking to buy a piece of property on State Street, I want to be clear that they are just like any other entity that might put an application in before the city. They're a private organization and making decisions about where they operate and how they operate. But before they can make that final decision to operate there, they have to get permission from the city to do so. And as we go through that process, the neighborhood meeting, I believe, is what people were referring to last week, where the applicant or potential applicant has to have a meeting. Our own Director of Planning Services, Cody Riddle, is joining the Collister Neighborhood Association next week or the week after to more clearly delineate the process that Interfaith will go through and the opportunities that residents will have to engage. But they'll come to Planning and Zoning Commission for a hearing. That decision made by P&Z is appealable to the City Council, and then at the City Council level, a decision will be made. Now, throughout all of that, we want to make sure that we're hearing from the public your concerns, that we are looking at the investments the city has made along the State Street corridor, determining whether or not it's an appropriate use if the Interfaith Sanctuary actually buys the building, and then of course weighing in on whether or not they should operate there. All of that is to come. And as I've spoken to constituents in the last week, kind of walking through the process we have to go through, I think it's become clear that there's a sense that, you know, it's all already happening. And Interfaith should understand and does understand that there's a process that they have to go through. And we at the city know we have to hear from the public. And I want all of you to know that it's really important to me that we have these conversations, not only about whether or not the services are appropriate in the area, but what our housing strategy and strategy to support those experiencing homelessness within our community looks like as a whole. And then of course, how we make sure that where we're placing different uses makes sense for the best of the community, both current residents in the neighborhoods, current residents living in other places, individuals seeking support from the city and nonprofits. All of that and those conversations are to come. And I encourage all of you to stay engaged. I really appreciate that you're as engaged as you are. Having been on a neighborhood association board, Parks Commissioner, on the Planning and Zoning Commission, I value that engagement and believe it's so important to have a full, complete, and open process.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question is from Ryan from East. And let me pull it up here. He is curious why the city and the governor are not on the same stage and wants an update on COVID related things and vaccinations.
Can you, I think that if I understand the question from Ryan, it's the gist of it is, where are we on COVID
Yeah, that's the
and
gist.
vaccines? But
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the piece related to the governor.
He was curious why the governor moved to stage 3, and he does not believe the city has moved to stage 3.
Okay, now I'm understanding. I misheard. I thought of like an actual stage when I heard that the city and the governor aren't on the same stage. Now I understand. Sorry, Ryan. A couple things on this. We've seen throughout this entire experience with this pandemic that there are so many different layers of government that are weighing health impacts and making decisions. Governor Little makes a decision for the entire state. So everywhere from Boise County to Boise City overall. And then so he's put the state into one stage based on the disease counts, the hospital counts all around the state. And then he's also said that health districts, local health districts, county health districts around the state are supposed to make local decisions when things need to be different from where the state as a whole is at. And so we have the Central District Health Agency here that covers Boise, Ada County, as well as Valley County, and I want to say Mountain Home. And so that health district and that board reviews hospital data, disease counts, et cetera, and makes decisions for Ada County. And currently, we are under a different order based on the Central District Health decision and based on real-time data of what's happening in Ada County versus other counties of the state. And so our city health order follows the Central District Health Agency's orders. We look to hospital professionals, Central District Health, and other medical professionals to read the data, understand the data, and make the most appropriate local decisions. And then because they're the health experts, we refer to them in drafting our own order because we have to enforce it within the city of limits of Boise, even though it's an order that pertains to the entire county, Ada County. So right now, we are in a stage where masks are required, distancing is required, and events are limited to 10 people or below. Boise City has some special additional pieces related to the COVID order because we have an airport. And so we have some rules about people moving through the airport and necessity. And of course, we've made decisions on when to close public buildings, Boise City buildings, when to open them and to open services while still encouraging everyone, if they can, to use our digital services to protect everyone's health. We're doing that. And on vaccines, there's a state committee. So the city has offered our facilities like Ice World to the state and the health district in the event that we need some space for larger vaccination sites. But that's the extent of our involvement in the vaccine rollout, except that we are, Central District Health has approved some vaccine distribution to first responders by local agencies. But other than that, it's pharmacies and hospital systems that are giving out the vaccine. And there's a state committee that the governor appointed that determines who gets the vaccine, when they get it, and then how vaccines are distributed throughout the state. And then they provide those vaccines to the pharmacies and hospitals. And so right now, for those of you that might be trying to get appointments if you haven't been able to, those appointments are being made by the hospitals and pharmacies when they know that they will have vaccine available. So every week, there might be different appointments that open up for the next couple coming weeks, but that's being led by pharmacies and hospitals at the direction and oversight of the state.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question is from Raven. They're from downtown Boise, and they are curious.
Did you say Raven?
I said Raven. Yes, I
Raven,
did.
okay.
They're curious why the perpetrators of the Abraham Lincoln vandalism have not been charged yet.
Sure, Raven, I appreciate that question. And I actually just got an update recently. As many of you will remember, we all woke up to seeing the statue vandalized in Julia Davis Park. In fact, I was nearby when I was alerted and went over there and saw it myself. And just as in any other instance of vandalism, we've made it clear that we will hold the perpetrators of this incident accountable. There were some folks that talked openly about their engagement in the newspaper, but the police department assures me that they're waiting for various warrants, digital warrants, to be able to review information, and that they believe that there are multiple people that were involved, and they're conducting a full and complete investigation in advance of issuing arrests, or asking for warrants and then issuing arrests. We will hold the perpetrators of this accountable, just as we seek to hold the perpetrators of other acts of vandalism accountable. And as the police department advance in their investigation and are ready to make those arrests, or have made those arrests, they'll be informing the public of that.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question is also kind of related to homelessness. Lauren is wondering how things will change after the new court case has been decided. I'm assuming she's talking to Martin v. Boise in relation to homelessness in Boise.
Sure. Hi, Lauren. Thanks for the question. So Martin v. Boise, I'm going to take Seth's cue that that's probably the case that you're referring to. That stems from tickets that the city issued over 12 years ago, and it's been in the courts for 12 years. I made a pledge to resolve the issue, and working with council to come up with workable solutions that the plaintiffs would agree to, so that we could move our community forward. So what the agreement that we came to means for Boiseans and for those experiencing homelessness is this. We are getting out of the courts and walking away from 12 years of arguments about homelessness and a case that stemmed from an older version of an ordinance we have in this community. And instead, the city has committed to making $1.3 million worth of investments in solutions to homelessness, with a focus on getting people housed. It is our priority as a city that we enact policies, that we come up with solutions, that we build partnerships with entities, organizations, individuals, what have you, to connect people with the services that they need to move into shelter and then ultimately into a home. Housing first is our strategy. So with those funds, about a third of them are required to go to overnight shelter, because the case from 12 years ago dealt with folks that were ticketed for sleeping outside. And we have made a commitment and a policy change that says we will, we passed an ordinance that memorialized a policy change we'd made in the course of this case. It says we'll only ticket if there are no beds at the shelter, and the shelter cannot discriminate against individuals. And so because this case tied to overnight shelter in the beginning, we committed to invest in and support organizations that provide temporary emergency shelter. The group of organizations that provide services to those experiencing homelessness, that works people to prevent eviction, keep people in their homes, will seek applications and grant requests for those funds. The rest of the money will go towards other programs with an emphasis on housing first. And I want to highlight some of the things that we've done in this last year. The City of Boise has invested in street teams, we call them, through Catch, and because we believe that the most important thing is to get people off the streets and then ultimately into housing. We want to connect people with the services they need to do that. So we invested in street outreach teams that pair mental health, addiction, physical health services, and counselors to those experiencing homelessness to help them move through the system with a goal eventually of being housed. We have invested in eviction prevention, because the most important way to prevent homelessness is to keep people in the homes they currently have. So working with Jesse Tree, we have invested in services that keep people in their homes. Of course, we are looking at additional ways to provide permanent supportive housing for our families. And during COVID, we worked with Interfaith and Corpus Christi to do two things. One, to house those who had been in the shelter that were families or medically fragile in hotel rooms to keep them safe, to get them healthier, to keep them healthy. We also supported Corpus Christi and Interfaith work to provide daytime shelter, which right now you'll see because the former space that Corpus Christi had was too small for COVID. And so we helped them in partnership with a landowner downtown find a place to have a day shelter that provided the space needed for social distancing in this era of COVID. So from kind of looping back to the case and its settlement allowed us the opportunity to commit to continuing our investments in services with an eye towards and focus on housing first, getting people housed, in partnership with a wide array of organizations that are part of something called Our Path Home that provide those services to members of our community that need support at this time and others. And I look forward to, as does the council, the fact that now we're focused on solutions rather than litigating. So we can address the problems here in partnership with local organizations and service providers to provide real service to Boiseans who need that support and to make sure that we get people housed in the long run.
Thank you, Mayor. And the last one we've got through the forms at the moment, and I'm going to switch over to the YouTube. So get your questions in there if you have them. The last question we have through the form is from Shelley from the Boise Bench, and she's kind of touching on a similar topic to what you were just asking or what you were just talking about. What's being done to keep people in their homes or their apartments right now, rather than looking at the homeless side? What's being done to keep people in secure homes?
Thanks, Shelley. So that's a great question. And there's a couple things we're doing. Some of it I did touch on already, but I'll just touch on it again. As I happen to mention, the most important way to prevent homelessness and to address homelessness in a community is to keep people housed. We know that we need more homes. The occupancy rate of rentals the vacancy rate of rentals is so low in this community. People are seeking housing. And the pandemic shed a light on how insecure too many Boiseans are when it comes to housing. So we knew that we need to keep people in their homes. And so we made early investments. Even before COVID, we committed to making investments in eviction prevention organizations that would partner with our residents that were housing insecure or that were facing eviction and do everything they could to support them and keep them in their homes. We've invested in service organizations that connect those currently experiencing homelessness with the services they need to be able to move into shelter, but most importantly, into home. And sometimes that's just as simple, whether it be keeping people in their home or helping them find an apartment, as clearing up some back bills on utilities. So during COVID, especially during the stay-home order, the city worked to just hold off on charging and allow some bridge time to those who are struggling to pay their utility bills, because we didn't want that to become a mounting issue and force additional evictions in the event that bills piled up, or that bills would pile up and it would become even harder for people to find an apartment, the next apartment, or the next home that they needed because of that record. And just in the last, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we announced that we did receive $11.5 million. So over $11.5 million from the federal government for rental assistance programs. We applied and we're so pleased to receive the funding because we know that there are many Boiseans that are struggling to pay those utility bills, to pay their rent bills because their jobs have been impacted by the pandemic. And so just last week or the week before, we authorized sending that funding over to Boise City Ada County Housing Authority, where you can apply for funding through them. In fact, maybe Seth, if there's a chat or something, we could put out the website. There's a website where people can apply for rental assistance from these funds. The county also receives the funds. So if some of you are listening and you don't live in Boise City proper, you can apply for funds through Ada County as well. I think they received about 12 million. We applied at the same time. And then Representative Nash, State Senator Wintrow at the legislature have also been working with CARES funding to make sure that statewide residents can receive rental assistance, and also additional funds will come to Ada County from the state through Idaho Housing and Finance Association to provide rental assistance. So we're trying to work together to make sure there's as much support in our city and county as possible, because we recognize that keeping people in their homes is first and foremost to ensuring that our residents are housed and we prevent additional homelessness.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just put the website into the chat there so you can check it out. The questions, we've been getting a lot of questions again on Interfaith. The difference between the ones on YouTube, seemingly from the ones we received from the forums, is people are curious about what the impact is going to be to that State Street area. And they're wondering, do we know what the impact will be? And will State Street now be where all homeless people go?
So that's a great question, and it's something that we all have to explore through this process. I've made it clear to our housing team, to our police department, that we need to better understand the impact of moving a facility from one place to another, the services that we need to make sure are accessible. We know right downtown right now, the library is used, Catch is near the current facility, the current overnight shelter that Interfaith manages, and there's other shelters in the area. So as we move through this process, as Interfaith, the private entity, does its due diligence and decides whether or not to purchase, and the city does its due diligence in walking through the process, hearing the final proposal or proposed proposal from Interfaith, but also from our housing experts and service providers, from our police department, and of course from our neighborhoods, how all of this can work together. If it can work there, we will learn more, and all that information that the council and myself collects will weigh into the decision that's made at the city level as to whether or not Interfaith can operate in the area that they're looking at right now. There's a lot we all need to explore, a lot that has to be considered, and this is just the very beginning of that process, because there's so much that we all have to hear from, and we have to see an application. The city has not seen an application yet. I understand that there are concerns. I have them too, because I want to make sure that we are making decisions that best support Boise's focus on housing first and housing in the long run, while also recognizing that there are people in our community that need services and emergency services now. And we want to be supportive of the organizations, the many organizations, Interfaith included, that provide important services to residents of our city, while recognizing that the permits that we provide, where we place those services, has impacts on existing neighbors, but also those receiving services. And that's why there's so much more information that we need to collect and see ourselves in this decision-making process.
Thank you, Mayor. And one more question on Interfaith, and then I'm going to try to get to some of the other questions that are here. People are curious why the city was talking to
Interfaith. No. I'm sorry, Seth. Seth?
Yes, can you hear me?
Everything froze for just a second. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Okay. Is there a lag now? For a little bit, you and Lavona froze, but as long as you can hear me, I did hear the end of the question, and that was why we were talking to Interfaith. Is that?
Yeah, people are curious why the city was chatting with Interfaith leading up to a decision possibly being made later on.
Sure. So first off, I'm going to say there appears to be a lag. So I'm going to answer the question, but if there's a weird break in between my answer or the next question, I apologize. It just seems that there's a bit of a lag right now. The city talks regularly with Interfaith for a couple reasons. They provide a very important service to our community. They provide emergency overnight shelter. And particularly so first let me back up. So that is ongoing. And as I've done police ride-alongs and other things, I see firsthand how often we talk to the organization, even our regular employees and public safety providers, because there's constant communication just about how many beds are available, so that the police know at night where to direct people to go. It's very basic, kind of daily communication almost. There's a bulletin that goes out. And then our staff talks regularly with Interfaith because of the partnership that we've had over the years to direct folks to the services they need. And particularly in COVID, we did a couple things this year with them. We helped fund hotel rooms to house medically fragile residents from Interfaith Sanctuary, and we offered it to the other homeless shelter providers as well as families. We wanted to remove those folks from the shelter environment, put them in their own rooms so that they could stay healthier, and then free up beds for others so that we make sure that people had beds at night to keep people healthy, especially last winter as everything was just coming so quickly and we were learning every day the impacts of COVID and then how to mitigate and keep people safe. So we have those conversations on a regular basis. The city also right now has been funding and investing in day shelter that I mentioned earlier in a larger space downtown where the Foothills School used to be. That's a joint venture of Corpus Christi, Interfaith, and then with financial support from the city, because we knew it was in our city's best interest to make sure that there was space for people to go during the day. We wanted to have enough space to keep people healthy and to be able to connect individuals with the services they need to move, from shelter into home. And so just as we worked with Interfaith and we work with the rescue mission and we work with Catch to connect services to those experiencing homelessness, we can move them from house into home. We work with other entities that are part of our Path Home to prevent eviction, to address housing, to create, as you've seen, Valor Point and New Path permanent supportive housing. There are many partners in this community that provide services that the city works with and communicates with on a regular basis.
Thank you, Mayor. And for folks in the chat, I'm not trying to ignore your question. We've just gotten a lot of questions on Interfaith, and we're not going to get to every
I wish I could
single
see the chat. I can't see the chat. I just see you and Lavona.
Well, there are some people that want us to get to their questions. I'll try to get back to Interfaith at the end, but we did have a couple of other questions from folks in the chat also not related to Interfaith. So I wanted to hit on those real quick. Tanya is curious how the city council districts will work moving forward. She's curious about the legislation that's in the state house that will make the legislative, sorry, my old life is kicking in there, the city council districts that will make them based on geography.
Sure. So Tanya, thanks for the question. Last year, the legislature passed a bill that said cities with, I think, more than 100,000 people would go to districts rather than at large seats as we've typically had in Boise. And then after that bill passed, we asked the legislature, Senator Winder in particular, if he would bring an additional bill this year that would clarify how it works. That bill makes clear that we don't have to use census data from 10 years ago to do districts this time around, but instead we'll use the census data that was just collected in 2020 and build out council district seats in parallel to redistricting at the legislative and county levels. Now, this will be a council process. So just like the legislature does and oversees redistricting at the state level, the city council is the legislative wing of the city, will do the same for these districts. Right now, there's some concern because a draft bill says that this year, anybody that runs would be running for 2 years and then all 6 seats will be up in 2023. That bill hasn't passed yet, but we appreciate the Senator Winder has brought the bill because it addresses census issues, because we didn't want to build districts based on population data from 10 years ago when we've grown so much. We would prefer that, and we've asked that the races this year not automatically be two-year seats, with all 6 being up in 2023, but that's ultimately something the legislature will decide. So once that bill passes, it will become clear how the districts will be built and when they'll be built. And then the city council will look at data provided by the census, by the county, by the state, and start to build out council districts in this city in the same way that legislative districts are built out by the state. The intent would be to keep things as simple and clear as possible. So, precincts that are precincts for the legislature would also be precincts for the city. So we, build boundaries related to how legislative districts are built. But all of that is to come after the final bill of the legislature is passed. And then I imagine, but best to ask the city council, that they'll begin to work on what districts would look like after that, in parallel with the state doing the same.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm finally going to actually get to the very first question that we got in the YouTube today. And I wanted to assure Jessica, she sent a question into the chat. It's very specific on CCDC guidelines and policies. I'm going to get you an answer on that, but I'm talking with the team. We'll get you specifics on that. I'm not sure if anyone else will follow how detailed you're being on that question. But the very first question came in from Gary from downtown Boise, and he's wondering why we're ticketing cars again.
Hi, Gary. We are ticketing cars again because we are finding that most businesses are open downtown, and it's important that cars be moving through and using our garages where you can have your first hour free, but recognizing that there was a revenue loss for the city, some of which we didn't want to continue losing because it impacts other investments that we can make. But because downtown was reopened, more vibrant, we were opening as a city, and we made the decision to reinstitute some of the ticketing policies we had in the past. We waived them and just stopped altogether for quite a while. But given the activity we were seeing downtown, we believed it was appropriate in time to go back to some of the old policies we had, so that people would follow the time limits, of course, pay the meters, but then always think about that first hour free that you can get in the parking garages.
Thank you, Mayor. And to answer one question from the chat just off the bat, you will be able to find this recording on the YouTube channel. It just goes right there afterwards. And then we've got about 15 minutes left. It's mostly interfaith stuff that's left in the chat. So I'm going to go to the three questions that I don't know if we've answered yet. The first is, will the city be monitoring the impacts of the Interfaith Sanctuary on the area if hypothetically it gets approved and the project goes ahead?
Oh, that's a great question. And so it's very hypothetical because to monitor requires approval, of course. And so I'll just point to some past decisions the city's made when there have been new or different uses in areas that have been approved. Often the council will put into the permit requirements around operating hours, operating procedures, collecting data, checking back in 6 months. There are different things that we've shown over the years as a city that we'll build into permits when we make the decision that yes, something can go there, but we want to make sure that the impact is as minimal as possible. And so I would imagine if this does move forward, that kind of holding the organization accountable, rules of operating, check-ins, et cetera, would likely factor into a proposal that the council put forward. But I need to be very clear that that's only from my experience as a planning and zoning commissioner and a city council person, that we are so far from that point from a process perspective, because an application has to be filed. We need to hear from the public and our own experts on the appropriateness of the location, services, et cetera, before getting to that point.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to do a side note because Gary did not think I asked his question properly. He's wondering why he was not informed that the parking tickets would come back into action. And I just can speak for myself because I'm also a downtown resident, that I did receive multiple flyers on my car and was informed through the parking enforcement people that the parking was going back into enforcement. But if you have anything to add, Mayor.
It was important to us that we do everything we could to alert the public, working with Downtown Boise Association, the flyers that you mentioned, Seth. I'm sorry that you missed that, and I'd encourage you just to let the city know, but it was our intent to let it be known as clearly as possible, because we knew that people had appreciated, although downtown was very empty at that point, the ability to park without tickets and without paying the cost of parking.
Thank you, and I apologize again, Gary. The next question is, people are curious if Interfaith could buy a different building.
It's not possible for me to answer that for Interfaith. There are areas throughout the city that it's my understanding they've looked. I imagine that they could continue to look. It's my understanding that they're in their due diligence period right now, and I hope that they are, hearing the concerns of the neighbors and taking that into account as they make their decisions. But Interfaith provides important services to the community, but is like every other nonprofit or business out there, private entity. And so the factors that they're weighing in this period of time, in this due diligence period related to this building, are factors that they are privy to. And we at the city are focused on ensuring that there are services provided, that the investments we make as a city are focused on a long-term strategy of getting people housed for good. And that when we make a decision on a permit request that Interfaith might or might not file, that we've made a full, complete, and transparent decision that takes into account the services and that the operations and services they're proposing to operate in this particular space. The expert advice and counsel of those on our policy staff that are focused on getting people housed for good, as well as first responders that respond to so many calls related to community needs and their experiences, and of course, the folks directly impacted by a potential decision. All of that will be all of that will be raised and considered by the council and myself in the decision if and when a permit is filed.
Thank you, Mayor. And there are just, I'm going to hit two last questions related to Interfaith, and it doesn't look like we have any other topics. And then I think we're going to have to call it good because you've got a thing you have to get to at 11, and I feel like Lavana's hands might be getting very tired right now. And I apologize. The first question is, if a conditional use permit is given, can it then be taken away?
So that's a great question. I'm going to encourage as many people as possible to attend the Hollister Neighborhood Association and to look on Facebook, because I saw yesterday that Kate, the president, had posted that Cody Riddle, the Cody who you often see if you ever watch city council meetings, presenting most of the applications to the city council. Cody's going to be joining the Hollister Neighborhood Association. I think they're partnering with veterans and maybe a couple other groups to have Cody join them and to share the city process that Interfaith will have to go through, that neighbors will participate in this decision-making time. And so please check Facebook for the Hollister Neighborhood Association schedule, because you'll see there when you can join. I imagine that it's digital just like this, and Cody will be going through the entire process and answering questions as well. I appreciate that he's gonna be there because he knows the process and the details in and out. But on the CUP, when I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council, there were times that we offered CUPs with conditions. And this gets to the question that somebody had just a bit ago on how and whether the city would hold an entity accountable if they were offered the permit, approved the permit to operate after they've requested. And so it is truly up to the council and the conditions that are placed in a CUP And when those conditions are placed, they are enforceable. And so this is all hypothetical, but just like I said before, in the hypothetical, yes, you could come up with conditions that would be enforced that would ensure would seek to provide protections to the neighborhood while allowing an important service to operate in a space. A CUP is that permit that would have the conditions embedded within it that would be enforceable, and then action would be taken depending on whether or not a condition was followed or breached. So again, all of this, I'm going to encourage folks to recognize that there's a long process ahead of us, many issues that will need to be considered by the city, by the provider, if they hope to get a permit there, if they decide to purchase building, and of course, things that the neighborhood and the corridor wants us to consider. Some of those factor into conditions that are made by the council in deciding to approve. It could be enough that the council says, you know what, this isn't right here. That entire process still has to play out. And we are committed to ensuring that we hear from all perspectives, that we weigh the importance of supporting people in our community that need emergency shelter, but that the steps that we take support our long-term goal of housing people first and for good. And then, of course, that we work with the neighborhood to ensure that if something is allowed to happen, the requirements that are placed on that entity, that private entity, are followed and enforced.
Thank you, Mayor. So we've only got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to bundle some things. Some folks are wondering, when will they be heard? There are going to be multiple other opportunities for public engagement. I know that there'll be at least 6 weeks where public comment will be taken if a permit is, if they move ahead and ask for a permit. So if this process moves forward, there will be a lot of public engagement that will still be out there. And I think if you go to that meeting with Cody, he'll be able to walk you through it. We'll also be trying to walk people through all the dates as we move forward if the Interfaith does decide to move forward. The two lingering questions that we still have is, first one I think you've addressed before, but have you met with Jody about this issue?
I'm just going to repeat some of what I've said before, because I've met with Jody and board members of Interfaith and the directors and board of Corpus Christi and Catch and so many other organizations in this last year, because they all provide services that are so important to our community, and they serve those in our community that desperately need their support. So on this proposal along State, or it's not even a proposal, on this idea along State Street in particular, Jody and I haven't met. I should say Jody Peterson and Interfaith and I haven't met. Probably about 2 years ago, they shared with me as a council member a proposal they'd put in front of the foundation for funding that looked at a whole suite of services that shelters provide. I found it fascinating. It was modeled off of a successful program somewhere else. It was an interesting conversation we had. It wasn't, and it isn't, as far as I understand, exactly what's being considered along State Street. And about a week or so ago, I just connected with the director of Interfaith again to reiterate that we were very early in the process, that I needed to hear from so many city folks as well as the public, and that until they had done their due diligence and filed an application, I didn't want to see any conversation related to the specific idea that they have along State Street, because it's really important to me that we continue to focus on the work that we're doing together now, because they are an important partner to the city of Boise, as are so many other service providers, without muddying the water on a decision that will need to be made at some point in the future.
And this will have to be the last question. I'm sorry for folks that still have questions in the chat, but sorry, the question was from Leslie Leslie. Not sure where Leslie is located, but they're curious if you would be interested in creating a committee to address homelessness, if that's something you'd be open to.
Leslie, thank you. for your question. And a couple things also, I just want to, just on the last question too, my calendar is made public. And so you're always welcome to go to the City of Boise's website, and you can see if I'm having constituent call hours, who I'm meeting with, what my days look like. It's an easy way to see who I'm meeting with. And because I promised before I was elected that I post a calendar, we continue to do that. And on the committee to address homelessness, Leslie, I'd love, if you want to be involved, I'm going to ask that you share your contact information. Send it to info@cityofboise.org. I don't want you to put it in a chat where everybody could see it unless you're comfortable doing that, because Seth could follow up with you. And we have a couple different committees within the community that address homelessness. We have our path, which is a continuum of care. It's a committee of organizations that provide services to those within our community that somehow impact homelessness. It's eviction prevention services, it's family services, health services, shelters, and more are all part of that committee. And then there are a couple of committees that I've met with over the years that are dedicated to housing first and ending homelessness. And those often operate out of nonprofits or churches where they brought different people together. And so we have staff here that are right now putting together a complete strategy, because the head of the Collister Neighborhood Association mentioned that there was a plan from like 2007 where the city laid out for the next couple of years what it would do around homelessness. And we don't have an updated one of those. I thought that was a great thing that Kate pointed out, because Maureen, our director of housing, has actually, for me, compiled, a strategy of all the different pieces that a city can't do it alone, and her partners and others that are committed should be addressing to ensure that we keep people housed, as well as housing strategy to ensure that we have enough homes in the community for those that are seeking them. And so that plan is, it exists, but it's actually being developed, and we'll be sharing with council and the community soon, so that once again, folks can see what the city's doing. But there are various committees throughout the community that are focused and dedicated to the same topics that we rely on often to help inform us. So if you're interested in being engaged, I'd love to have you engaged, and we'd like to connect you with those people that convene the committees. And with that, it's 11 o'clock, and I've got to jump to my next appointment. But I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining today. This is the first time in a while that we've gone now over the hour, and I know that there was more that people wanted to discuss. So thanks for joining. Your commitment to your neighborhood, to your city, is really the backbone of who we are as Boiseans. I appreciate your engagement. Love this time, because it also helps me better understand what folks are thinking about and how we can best serve each of you. So really appreciate that you tuned in, and I'll see you next month. Take care, everybody. Stay healthy. Be well.